Hello and welcome to another episode of the Total Clarity Podcast. I'm Mike Varley.
I'm Jessie Hyatt.
And if you are watching this on YouTube, do not adjust your monitors. You are seeing our logo rotating again and again, and that's because we have no video this week. So for all you that are devoted Spotify and otherwise listeners, you are not actually missing anything this week.
All you're missing is our rotating logo, which, I don't know, maybe that's nice to look at.
Yeah.
But you're not missing anything. You're fine. You're good.
That's right. And that is because, as usual, we're doing something a little bit different than any other week that came before it. This week, instead of talking about our walk, which covered the North Shore / Central Staten Island, we are going to be talking a little bit about the place we're staying.
Yeah, that's right. So this month of September, instead of commuting to Staten Island every day from our Brooklyn apartment, we decided to find a place to stay on Staten Island itself. And we were able to find a lovely intentional community called Ganas. And we have been staying here for the month. And we were able to speak with one of the founding members of this community and hear a bit about how it got started and what it's been like over the last 50 years or so since it's been around.
40 years. Since July 1st, 1980, as we'll find out.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll have to re-listen to this and get my facts straight, but you all are going to hear the truth.
That's right. So you're about to hear a conversation we had with Michael Johnson, one of the co-founding members of Ganas. And we recorded this after one of our walks on the first week, and we did it in an informal manner where Michael meets with people that typically come and visit and want to know a little bit more about the community. And so we just strapped the mics on but didn't do the video. So That's why it's an audio exclusive.
That's right.
And as befits the informal nature of the conversation, you'll be hearing a lot of ice cream trucks and car noises throughout the whole thing.
Sets the scene. We're still in the city, even though it feels like we're somehow removed because it's beautiful here. And right now you might even hear birds chirping and the more bucolic version of Staten Island. But we're still in New York City. There's still cars going by. There's still street noise. And that's what that is.
That's right. So without further ado, let us begin our conversation with Michael Johnson.
You want to start with questions? That's a much better way to. I much prefer doing it conversationally rather than here's the story of Ganas.
Yeah,
Sure.
Absolutely.
Well, since we watched the interview this morning, I had one question in particular that I think is kind of a good one because it's about the very beginning. I'm curious about the very, very beginning of Ganas.
Okay.
I'm curious. How did you know each other? And also, how long did you talk about doing something like this before you took the plunge?
Okay. So, the key person was a woman named Mildred Gordon. I met Mildred Gordon in 1968 in New York City. And there's a whole story behind that. But she and her husband at the time had started a very unusual school. It's a Human Relations Training Institute, and it was called GROW, G-R-O-W, Group Relations Ongoing Workshops. And it was a training school that no lectures. It was all experiential. So you want to come in and learn different ways of working with groups. You use the modality that you're studying. And if you want to explore a certain area of human behavior, experience, you would use a group dynamic for it. So it was experiential from the very beginning. and it was, you know, it was very radically organized, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which is exactly what I was looking for at that time in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And to make the long story short, so we get to the actual answer to your question, the school ran for about 5 years and got into a political fight. Well, we're politically attacked by the New York State Psychological Association, and one thing led to another thing, and Ed and Mildred, Ed was her husband, decided they would let go of the program, and they had a daughter who was 13 and things were not going really great for her, et cetera, and they decided to move to Arizona, and I decided to go with them. And in Arizona, we had a falling out, basically around a woman I fell in love with who, you know, so it was either you're either for me or you're for them kind of thing, and I made a choice. And then she and her husband divorced, and then she ended up with a young man who Jeff, who was attracted to her for her teachings and stuff like that, her thinking, and they ended up in San Francisco. Then in San Francisco, they hooked up with Susan, who came out on a part of her medical school training, and they met several other people, and so they were in the Bay Area. So the school was 68 to like 72. We were in Arizona up to about 75, so, and they were in San Francisco like 76 to 79, and I ended up in Austin, Texas at that time. So they ended up, about 5 or 6 people ended up living together in a loft, or, well, I guess in New York City you call it a loft, but I don't know what, but anyway, they were sharing a whole apartment.
Yeah.
And the basic ideas that Mildred had that started the training school, they got into talking about it and talking about it and talking about it, and, you know, et cetera, and finally, at one point, someone brought up the idea, says, well, why don't we just do it? And yeah, that sounds like a great idea. And then I think someone said something like, well, if we're going to do something that crazy, and San Francisco's not the place to do it, New York City's the place to do it. And several people already, George Caneda, who was from Spain, and he is Julie's husband. But he's now in Spain because he's a very unusual type of dwarf, and he has a lot of medical issues.
Oh, wow.
So he went back to Spain because, you know, it's a lot easier to get the help that he needs.
Yeah.
And now COVID,
Yeah.
and they're really separated.
Yeah.
But he and Bruno, who became Mildred's partner at the time, both were really fascinated at the idea of New York City.
Yeah.
So everybody converged on New York City, and they took an apartment on the Lower East Side. And then George went back to Spain, and Bruno went back to Germany, and Jeff, who was the one who had gone out to San Francisco with Mildred, he was in Denver with George's sister, and so everything spread. Everybody got there and then broke up.
Yeah.
And so Mildred went on this whole travel trip, talking to people about this crazy thing that she was thinking about doing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in the process, I had separated from my wife, and she had heard about it, so she came through Austin, and we reconnected.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually what happened was everybody did converge back, and they went looking for a place to start this project, and the only place in which the real estate was within means was Staten Island. But, one of the criteria was it had to be near the water.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was the first house that we bought.
This
Yeah.
one. Wow.
And it was it 6 of you at the start? How many was actually in the first house? How many people then? Because there's a lot of different names flying in and out.
Okay. Well, you say one of the things is that as soon as we got here and set up shop, there's so many things to bring in here. Okay. So I'll just start with your question.
Yeah.
So it was July 1st, 1980 is when we moved in to this building.
Yeah.
We had only the top 2 floors.
Okay.
The owner had 90 days on the bottom 2 floors.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That extended out into 9 months.
Ah.
So there was Mildred and Bruno, George, me, Anna, who is George's sister, and then another guy who never actually became a part of the group, but he knew everybody. His name was Capal.
Mm.
And then there was Julie, lived in Manhattan, and she was Capal's girlfriend at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So that was like the starting thing. And
Right.
then a guy named Alfonso came from Spain who was a friend of George's. And then this person came, and then that person came. And within, let's say this, 81, I would say that within a year and a half, we had 16 people living in this house.
Wow.
Wow.
Okay, like where you're right now, there were about 3
Yeah.
people.
Okay.
And this is a 3-story house, correct? Or 2?
Well,
Ground floor and then
it's
2.
It's a multi-family dwelling, you
Yeah.
know. So there's this floor, and then there's this floor, and then there's 2 more floors.
Oh,
Okay.
2 more. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the upper 2 floor, one floor was a 1 unit, and the one above it was a 3rd unit,
Yeah.
Mm.
and that was a unit downstairs.
Yeah.
But we kept, adjusting things, et cetera, et cetera. And you haven't been able to go inside the house.
Not yet. We're
Not
still
yet.
in quarantine.
Yeah,
Next
we have
Friday.
a couple more days.
So after 2 weeks, I can,
Yeah.
someone can give you a tour.
Yeah, we'd
of
love
that.
a tour.
But so at that same time, his house next door was occupied by a squatter,
Mm.
and there was a lien on the house, and the water pipe had busted, and so, it was such a difficult situation for the owner that he wanted to get rid of it, and so we got it very inexpensively.
Mm-hmm.
And then that became the workshop for learning how to build and fix and carpet and paint and sheetrock and deal with electricity and deal with plumbing. That became our workshop.
Right.
Cool.
So did anybody have a leg up on anyone else as far as those skills, or was it all just kind of everybody at the ground floor?
It was Bruno had a real disposition for it, and so he became kind of the lead person on that, and was the primary maintenance person for how do I say, the first 20 years.
Wow.
And then Richard came along in the late 80s, and then he got involved. So and then, but at one point, we had like we had 7 houses, 8 houses actually, and 100 people.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay, and that was kind of like, and we kept arguing. One of the principles that we used in this whole thing, because people kept coming. I mean, we had gotten into doing the project, and that was it was a fascinating project, and was I talked about that a lot in the interview, and that attracted a lot of people, and so it was a very, very dynamic energy, that was going on, and people were sharing all kinds of stories about themselves and looking at themselves and looking at each other, and then at the same time we got this house, and then we got that house, and then the house back there, we bought that house, and we got the store down at on 208,
Right.
and that the store there took off in the ways that we were really kind of, wow, because no one had done anything in business, not one of us, except Mildred had.
Yeah.
Her father had stores and stuff like that,
Uh-huh.
so
Yeah.
she learned a lot about that. And then one of the things was that all, that we were selling used stuff. That was we had a whole bunch of used stuff somehow. So we decided, well, let's open a store and put it in there and sell it. And then the people started coming saying, we've got stuff, et cetera, et cetera, and we go get it, et cetera. And then pretty soon the main feature of the business was furniture.
Right.
And then the furniture store, which is, have you been
We've
by
walked
it?
by
Yes.
it, yeah.
Yes.
So that building was a wreck.
Uh-huh.
It used to be a carriage, a firehouse
Oh.
with the horse-driven carriage,
Oh, wow.
wagon,
Yeah.
not carriage, but wagon.
Cool.
And it was built in such a way that the main structural support was an arch.
Oh, wow.
Huh.
And then, it went from this stage to that stage, different use, and then someone decided, hey, let's do a little renovation, and they cut the arch,
Oh.
which meant that they cut
the main
the
foundation.
main support structure
Oh, gosh.
for it. And so, and then it was 5 or 6 squatters were living in it. And so, and then we found, someone had it. They didn't want to deal with it. They had, it was an attachment that got attached. It was collapsed, and it was condemned, and it had all these squatters, and someone just wanted to get rid of the whole thing. So we got that building and the lot next to it for $33,000.
Wow.
Wow.
And so, anyway,
Amazing.
Was pretty much every acquisition, or were most of the acquisitions that type of opportunism, or did you reach a point where it was like we were growing to our means, we needed a property, or did you always kind of just wait until the opportunity was right to do expansion?
good question. We got this house because we had 16 people and we didn't have enough room for 16 people.
Right.
Okay. And then it took a long time to get it fixed up.
Yeah.
And by the time we got it fixed up and people started moving into it, we still didn't have enough. And more people were coming.
Wow.
So we came to a policy decision, which was we don't want to say no to anyone who wants to come.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we're going to have to buy.
Yeah.
At that time, George was working on Wall Street.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so we had, and Susan was a doctor, so we had substantial income coming. So we bought this house with a mortgage. We bought this one with cash. I mean, it wasn't that much, that we needed. The third house, which is the big one back there, that was we didn't have the money to buy that one outright. But we found out what the owner wanted, and we worked out a deal to where he could get the price he wanted, but on the time period we wanted.
Oh, smart.
Okay, and the time period he would be getting monthly exactly what he wanted to be getting,
Yeah.
etc. And so, but every other house that we bought, we paid cash for, because we had the capital to do
Yeah.
that. And every building that we bought, we bought with cash.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we only had 2 mortgages in the whole history of our purchasing.
That's great.
We had a lot
Yeah.
of discussion while we were listening to the interview about George and Susan's contributions with respect to finances. And we were going back and forth about the idea of like having an equitable solution to these things, and if there would be any angst as a consequence of one person contributing more than another. Now, of course, Jesse was able to talk about the idea is once you get to that place where everybody values each other's labor equally, and you know, somebody that's doing the gardening and somebody that's bringing in the finances are of the same plane, you know, it becomes actually a very logical choice. You know, it doesn't have to be a thing of angst or animosity. Still, I feel the anxiety about, you know, knowing that somebody would bring in more than me and then maybe feeling like there's a mismatch. I can imagine hearing how you're talking about it currently, that there was so much enthusiasm, that there were people that were coming for externally, that would, you know, from my mind, if I were the financier, so to speak, you know, that I would be excited to just contribute money because I want to see how big this thing grows. But how rocky, if at all, was that stage of navigating the idea of unequal financing?
Love your questions. They're just great questions. Just before you asked the question, I realized I was using the word we.
Okay.
And there's kind of a multiple we. And that's been the case from the very beginning. The large we is the people who are living here at a given time. But the people in San Francisco, one of the things that they started really looking at and thinking about and arguing about and debating but exploring was the idea that and this was an idea that Susan brought in. She said, we should all be available to everybody with regards to everything, sexually, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so all the discussion started coming up. So there was this long line of thinking and arguing and debating, you know, the pros and cons of all of this. And the basic thinking that Mildred was bringing into the game, okay, had to do with connection, relationship, thinking of yourself as you're not just what's inside your skin, et cetera, et cetera. And that the project had a very deep political objective, which was how do people live together and work out problems. And that's really what people were becoming really drawn to, is how can we live together and work out problems? And it's a research project. So from the very beginning, we were thinking of ourselves as a research project. Now, the we I'm talking about now is a small number of people who are the actual founders and people who came and joined into that project as we went. So very early on, we had formed. It kind of emerged, but it was always there, and it got a little bit more formal, and we're even still formalizing it to this day, because we just invented ourselves into an LLC. So we called it, the name that came up was we're the core group.
Okay.
Okay. And now you used the word equity and equal. And one of the very radical aspects of this, the core group thinking and the intentionality behind the whole project, the concept of equal is distorted, or it distorts it.
Mm.
This is what I want to do. This is what I have to give, and I'm willing to give everything. So, I don't know how much you guys, are you all married or?
No, we're not.
No.
We've been around a while though, about 6
Okay,
years
but-
together.
Okay. So do you think in terms of you're equal and what she's doing is equal and or is it much more in terms of, look, I want this and you're getting in the fucking way, that's, you know?
I think it's a little both.
I think it's both.
Yeah.
I think we try to be equal, but there's an
Right, then
element
you
of
start
both. Depends on
measuring.
the situation.
Once
yeah.
you start talking equality, you're talking measuring.
Yeah.
And we wanted to get away from measuring.
Mm.
And the rule of thumb that we developed, that we wanted to try to live by, if somebody wants something from you, they ask you for something, you say yes, unless there's a good reason to say no.
Yeah.
Now you're not measuring anymore.
Right.
It's the measuring. So there was another community that had been around for about 20 years, and one of the key persons died, and it was breaking up, and they had a lot of different kinds of property and stuff, and they were going to have to go into how to negotiate this. And of course, by the time they got to the point to where they were breaking up and there was the property, et cetera, there was lots of tensions and things that hadn't got resolved, over the last 3 or 4 years, blah, blah, blah. And the advice that George was helping them, the advice that George said, in your first conversation, you want to start talking about what do each of you want. Do not get any conversation going in terms of what someone has a right to. And they settled the whole thing in one conversation.
Wow.
And they were all just, the whole right business was all right there on the edge. And that just opened another door, and everybody went through it.
That's interesting. That is a very big difference, huh?
A huge difference.
Yeah.
And a profound, politically profound difference.
Yeah. I wonder, and this, I correct me if I'm wrong, but when you talk about...
Let me just put one piece
Oh,
in
yes,
to
please.
finish.
Yeah.
And from the very beginning, it wasn't a question of everybody's equal in terms of their work. It was a question of every job is essential. So no job should be compensated more, deserves more, et cetera, because every job is essential. And that was the idea behind that, not equality.
No.
Yeah. That makes sense. I wonder if in getting into that mindset, is there sort of like any sort of like spiritual practice of like letting go of your possessions and or like in service to each other, or is it
No.
purely just like a sharing economy, or like
No, I'm
does
in
any
this
of that
because
relate,
this is,
or
I'm in this because this is the way I want to live my life.
okay,
And I have these relationships.
yeah,
And I built up, it's an in early part of the 2003 or 4, something like that, I turned about 63 or 4, and I said, look, I don't want to retire, but I want to step back and I want to start doing things that I want outside. There's a lot of stuff that I want to explore. And I started doing that, and as I was doing that, I realized at one point I just had a whole thing walking down the street in New York, in Manhattan. My God, this platform that I have is just so fucking incredible. I can do this because there is this platform. and I helped to build it, and I'm committed to it, and I'm committed to maintaining it.
Mm.
You know, and it just was, wow.
Yeah.
Circling.
We're talking the
Yeah.
core group right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The real distinction.
Right.
Yeah. Circling back to the kind of the tenet that you described, say yes unless you have a reason not to.
A good reason.
A good reason
A
not
good
to. Yeah,
reason.
yeah, right. So, one reason that I could imagine is debatable is the idea of having one's own personal space / personal ambition. Did that ever come up as a reason to or not to? Like was it clear from everybody of the core group from the beginning that that personal identity ambition track was not a compelling reason to not do something? Does that make sense?
It was a major problem we worked on day in and day out. I mean, the whole business of rivalry and status, etc. We made a distinction between competition and rivalry.
Okay.
Competition is for limited resources, and that's a given. I mean, people have interests, there's limited resource, there'll be conflict, and people will compete.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily turn into the winner take all, but anyway, rivalry, status, all of that stuff. That was what we worked on.
Mm-hmm.
We came together to live together to deal with whatever comes up, and all of us have embodied what everybody else has embodied through in our culture in their unique and various forms. And it was all there, and we were trying to deal with it as best as we could, and that was the research work.
Yeah.
How can people talk about the problems? Because they don't talk about the problems, you're going to have hierarchy. I mean, not hierarchy, you're going to have domination.
Yeah.
Right.
Hierarchy is something we built into the project from the very beginning, in the sense of what we call a participatory management system. So all the work is broken up into specific areas. Julie is in charge of the housing things. Richard is maintenance, and the person in the manager in the area makes the final decision. But anything that's important, that has to be done with consultation.
Mm-hmm.
So we meet 5 days a week for an hour or so to deal with whatever needs to be dealt with. So there's completely ample time for people to bring up the issues that are going to really have large impact. But the discussion, the debates, et cetera, that ever happen, the manager makes the decision, not the group.
Oh, wow.
We when the hurricane came, Sandy, the roof of that house was damaged, so it had to be replaced. And so there was a bunch of people went in and started doing the research. They got this and that, and we're discussing these pros and cons, and it got down to two choices. And there were very strong advocates for both choices, and we were in the middle of this long, this is like the 8th or 9th intense discussion that we had, and it was going on, and it was still back and forth, and finally Richard said, okay, that's it. I've made my decision. We're going with this one.
Wow.
Oh, okay. And we moved on.
How many years in did it take you to implement that managerial top-down, or was that from Jump Street?
Not top down.
Or well, I'm sorry.
No.
Yeah.
It's really, really important,
Yeah.
because everybody thinks hierarchy means top down.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
No, the manager is appointed by the group.
Yeah.
The manager makes the decision in the area of work, not everywhere, okay?
Uh-huh.
But they have to consult,
Mm.
and they have to hear and listen. It's not just, okay, I'm consulting, go ahead.
Right.
Right.
You know, then they get fired.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, the consult is consult.
Right.
You're really looking to get new information
Yeah.
that you don't have.
Yeah.
Okay? And then the other thing is that most of the decisions, that Richard has to make, affects Julie.
Mm.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
So there's a balancing factor that
Yeah.
goes on.
So you did use a phrase
it's
at the
not
beginning.
top-down.
Yeah, what was the phrase that you had referred to it as?
It's participatory management.
Participatory management. Okay, cool. And how far into, from July 1st, 1980, did that system get established?
In a way, you can say it's still getting established.
Yeah.
I mean, all of this stuff that really generates the problems that we really can't solve, it's all been very deeply embedded.
Yeah.
And so it's been a whole, the project is what I call transformative learning.
Mm-hmm.
You are able to actually identify what you've embodied and what it means and what the implications are. You don't get it here, oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most powerful experiences I had was because I was born and raised in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
So I came with a lot of rivalries.
Mm.
And this was some 15 years down the road, and I'm walking down the street, walking home from the ferry, and this had been really preoccupied with this for, a particular aspect of it for, several weeks or something like that. And then I just fucking got it. My drive to be superior means I am disvaluing the other person.
Mm.
Mm.
That's what this is about.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
It's downright nasty and mean and destructive. And it took 15 years of work
Right.
to really, really get it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because I have it embodied and I bought into it, and it's because it serves me,
Yeah.
or I'm convinced it serves me.
Yeah.
And there is an enormous amount of stuff that's got to go on within us in order to get to the point to where you can really say, no, I'm not going to, that's not going to be one of my values anymore.
Yeah.
Mm.
But it doesn't go away.
Right.
You've just changed your relationship to it,
Right.
and you've got something else, and slowly that becomes weaker and this becomes stronger.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And particularly pursuing the life path that you have, the rivalry system is just a further and further disservice. It's
Mhm.
really
Right.
impeding
Yeah,
your
I mean,
ability to
yeah,
value
it's-
this system.
Right.
Yeah.
And we've had just major at this point the change the world energy has calmed down quite a bit.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Around 2000 there was a real shift, and people said, look, this has been phenomenal. I want to keep it, but also want because most of the people were in their 20s when we started
Mhm.
the core group. Mildred was in her 50s and I was 40, so but it was like, there's other stuff out there I want to get into. I want to have a baby, or what have you, and all of that stuff was stuff that we had been putting off.
Yeah.
And then, over the last 10 or 15 years, there's just been a lot of settling, getting older, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But, what we developed and embodied in that first 20 years it's substantial. It
Yeah.
doesn't go away.
Yeah.
Well, now it's just patinaing,
That's what?
It's like a patina that's developing
Yeah.
now. It becomes
Right.
a different thing.
Right.
Where, I mean, our experience as far as encountering Ganas was, we talked about it. We were like, how did we even find out this exists? And we're like, I don't even remember. I in 2006-07, I had lived in Austin in a co-op called Sasona off South Lamar, and
Where?
South Lamar by Maria's Taco Express, where that statue is over there. And I had learned a tremendous amount. I really enjoyed my time there. And then it was time to leave, and I haven't really experienced anything like that until very recently when we were going to start this project up. I thought, are there intentional communities in New York City that are even approximating that we could maybe use as part of our and also like stay there and take the values of an area and bring our own experiences for the duration of time while we explore. And I guess I must have just searched that on Google, and that's when Ganas came up, and
It's Ganas.
Ganas.
That's a Spanish word.
And it was saying when you this was part of the reason I was really excited about the space, when you make the decision that you're about to do something, that instant, the actual moment when
It's
something
when
you've been
in
contemplating.
conflict,
Yeah.
and you the Ganas is the motivation to break the conflict and go for it.
Yeah, and that was something that really resonated with us insofar as we were planning this trip to walk 5 marathons a week for a year, like, and to have,
There was definitely conflict that we had to break to go forward.
That's quite a commitment.
yeah. So it really resonated with both of us, and just to it was such kind of a magical surprise to find that this existed, unbeknownst to us we've been in the city for 10 years and it had never encountered our radar. We try as best we can to encounter non-conventional, systems and ideas while we're in the city. So it was just a beautiful surprise,
In relation to people finding this place and coming here, how does it go? Like when new people, I know we've been mostly talking about the core group. When new people come in, is there a period of time where there's a teaching of values, or is there sort of like a learning period, or how does that typically, or maybe not typically, maybe there's like some good story you could tell about how that works with new people coming to live here?
It's been a huge shift. The first 15 or 18 years, we had the morning planning session, and we had an evening dinner was another session. So what you basically had was what I call a transformative community of practice. That was the whole core of the community. And there was, for a long time, there was 20, 25 people who were involved in that. And that energy radiated out to the rest of the community. And people came in, and there was, there was orientations, there was discussions, there was, interviews and stuff like that. And I guess Mildred was, in a way, a major force in that, because she was very uniquely single-minded. You don't meet many people that are single-minded, and that's got huge advantages, and it comes with big disadvantages at the same time. So, but she was one of her singular focus was recruiting people into this project. So there was a lot of energy and stuff that that went into it. When she retired and we made the big changeover, which I was referring to, that people said, "Wait a minute, we've done this. Let's," and that was a very dynamic 2 or 3 year period that this whole thing kind of emerged. Since then, there has been nothing to equal that kind of attraction and orientation. And we have an orientation program now in which we take people through some of the very basic things, but there isn't an orientation process that really takes, okay, this is what the project is all about. Because it's not that kind of a transformative community of practice anymore. And I've been pushing for it, but and at the same time, I'm in conflict about it. I'm pushing for it because I think the project isn't going to go on past the core group unless it does.
Right.
And but on the other hand, I'm writing a book. I have a whole project of mine that I want to do, and I'm 78, and I've got like a good deal, and it's like I'm not 40 who just came through a very traumatic divorce and looking for some new way of life. I'm not there. It's 40 years later, and I've got my way of life.
Right.
So, there's that kind of energy would have to, somehow someone have to come in with that kind of energy and pick up on it, et cetera. And if there were, they would probably get a lot of support.
Right.
But I don't think the energy to actually really launch it is here right now.
Yeah.
Now you also can say this to other people in the core group and go, "Oh, bullshit!"
Right. It's your opinion, yeah.
But
Right.
I have tried 10 years to push this,
Yeah.
and the conversation never really goes very far.
Yeah.
So
Right.
I think I have the evidence for what I'm saying.
Yeah. So, with that in mind, that it's not sort of the main thrust at the moment, when there is conflict between non-core group members here, are the same values applied to that? And is there assistance in figuring that out? Is that done as a group, or is that typically just, or
Yeah,
how does that go?
We do our best to
Yeah.
to live out and practice the values because we really find them that make sense.
Yeah.
And it becomes very difficult when the thing that was really special, or one thing that was really special, is that you could be in conflict with somebody, and there was always, wait a minute, we're not going to go very far on this unless we start talking about how we're talking about it. Because Michael, you're not available for the conversation. What's going on? Where are you on this? And you stop trying to solve the problem
Right.
to talk about how you're not available to solve the problem.
Right.
And that was the the core of our process, is that we would go to that level. And then, but we had people who had committed in various degrees to do that work. So someone who's here now, they may or may not be available for that. And if they're not available for that, well then you do the best you can.
Right.
Within that limited framework.
Yeah, that makes sense. That totally answers my question, because I'm wondering about, it sounds like there's this group, the core group, that really has studied and practiced and researched and worked together, but then you think about new people coming in, and
Right.
it's, even for me, someone that listens to a lot of social scientist things and has been in therapy for a long time, like even that is a difficult thought process to get into. And I could think for someone that's brand new to it, it might be challenging. So that makes sense that you share, but not necessarily always get there.
one of the things that got brought up in the interview that we listened to today, the idea of culture and structure was something that got brought up, and you referenced the idea that you think culture is paramount, but structure is very much informing of culture. Did I just say that wrong? That you would take culture over structure. That it's important to have the people that are together to be on the same page culturally, and that structure can come second. Was that something? Oh, A, is that a correct assessment? And B, is that something that you saw represented in the people that were here? Like, were there also some people that thought, I think structure is more important than culture, and then they played out their values in the group and you had conversations based on that? Or was everybody kind of on the same page where it's like, culture is the most important, we'll figure out the structure later?
Very few people have talked about it in those terms. I kind of came to use that framework in the interview because of the book that I'm writing.
Okay.
And the project that I'm trying to start. So let me frame it the way, but I was in the context of
that conversation. Yeah.
Of that conversation.
Yeah.
So I'll just give you my basic framework for it.
Yeah.
Social reality has two dimensions. One of those dimensions is the in here dimension, and the other one is the out there dimension. When we get born, the out there in some way, shape, or form gets embedded in us. But that embedding can't happen unless we embody. So think of language. There isn't any way in which I, without some physiological damage, could ever forget how to speak English. It's embedded and embodied. That happens in everything that I have learned in being able to function in this society. This society has wanted me to become a member, so the process is embedding. And for me, I want to be part of this. My mama, and I embody. So structure is what gets embedded, embodied.
Okay.
It's in here, it's out there. There's no racism out there unless there's racism in us. There's no English language out there unless it's in here. So that division of culture and structure, which I started out working with that, and then a friend of mine said, "What are you talking about? Structure is as culture as everything else." That's culture. I said, "Yeah, that's right." So I had to really, really go back to the drawing board. And so it's as I come up with the in here and the out there, but this in here and out there makes sense only in terms of this whole notion of embedding, embodying, being a single process. It's two phases of the same dynamic.
So is what is the analog to culture at that point? Or I guess my question would be, is there an essential self that exists, or is it all through the conduit of whatever the culture that's impressed upon us?
We're biocultural. So your biology has always been different than mine or hers. And so there's a whole unique dimension that this is a unique body that's embodying.
Right.
And then there's the family it could use a term that I use in the book. A lot of this is taken from a sociologist called Pierre Bourdieu,
Okay.
and he's just an amazing, construct for how to look at, the social process. So the term he came up with was habitus. It's a very old term, but no one had already used it. Somehow he ran across it in Aristotle, and that's exactly what I'm trying to talk about. So the habitus is what gets embedded, embodied. What you embedded, embodied through your family experience, your peer group, your education, et cetera, et cetera. And it's all very, very unique. And agency is a fundamental aspect of the human being. So we have this capacity to reflect. Reflect opens the door to being able to make changes. So it's not determined, although there's determination, but there's determination and agency. And that was one of the main things that Bourdieu was trying to do. He was trying to say, it isn't all objective, it isn't all subjective. We need to be able to understand that the objective and the subjective are aspects of the same phenomenon. And that's where the habitus came in. Embedded, embodied. The structures come in, but the reason the structures are out there to begin with is because we produce them.
Yeah.
And then we reproduce them. We keep speaking English. If everybody stopped speaking English, it wouldn't be transmitted.
Right.
But we embody, embedded, and then we reproduce, and we change, and we transmit. And that's culture. And this is the unique thing about the human beings, is they have developed this thing to, way beyond any other creature on the earth.
Yeah.
But it's biological as well.
Yeah.
So we're biocultural.
Yeah.
I'm really testing out my book here, and it's
And-
working.
Yeah, I like it.
I'm looking for readers if you're interested.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah, totally.
Definitely.
Seriously?
Yeah,
of course.
Yeah, we're readers.
You're right. I mean,
But I definitely want to read the book. I will say this: we have about 2 hours before we go to sleep every night, so it might take
that's
us
a good
while.
point. It might take us a
no,
while.
I understand that. I mean, I'm very close to the point of getting to where I'm going to send it to a publisher.
Oh, nice.
And I'm wanting to start a website.
Nice.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah. How long has
I'd love to read it and I could tell you what I think, but Mike is really he's a reader and a writer and an editor and a
great.
lover of language. So he's really the one to look at. I'll read it
No,
and be
no,
like,
no, no,
I'll
no,
no. You want
chat.
both of our opinions.
I'll chat about it, but
no escape hatches. And I'll
Oh,
tell you why.
I still want to,
And
but
I'll
yeah, tell
I'll
me
tell you
why.
why. My audience is the everyday citizen.
Oh, right. Yeah, so you want it to work on the super language guy and also the girl that just wants to chat about it.
Right.
She's elevating me
both.
too much and self-depreciating
I know she
herself.
has. She's giving them too much away during
That's
the
right.
course of the conversation.
How long was it that you've been undertaking the writing of this book?
The long answer to that, since I was 16.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
The short answer is after Trump's election.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It was the jet fuel.
But it was, the whole thing has been, I got into this is it's just one big long arc.
Yeah.
I got into this because of what happened when I was 16 and what happened, I was involved in the Columbia University student strike in '68. It happened because I was in a monastery for 3.5 years and had a whole crisis around guilt that unglued the Catholic faith. And then I just, undid it and you know, that's a whole it's a whole series of things. You know, it's all one big movement.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I finally started getting where it was all going in 2005, 2006. Vaguely had it, you know, got it, and then I just had the sense of, okay, the next step is this. Oh, okay, and then the next step. You know, I've just been following from this step to that step.
Yeah.
Except my ambition and all of that gets me off track, and then the book gets fucked up. It's like, I mean, it's like I have a muse, you know. It said, no, you can't do that. You cannot do that. Write the book. Fuck everything else. Just write the book.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm having a delightful, wonderful time, and I would love to be available for whatever. I want to hear your stories too.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
I would consider this an initial conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There is one thing I wanted to share, and I don't know if it is related or just adjacent. We'll find out. But with the idea of embedded, embodied / culture structure, something that we had talked about last month. We were in Manhattan all last month, and we are walking all the streets, and we were talking about how the city is outlined, or how it's laid out, right? And we kind of did it in a way that might not seem intuitive. The week one was Midtown. We called that walk the grid, and we went up and down 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th Avenue. Each 5 days, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to be the most regimented walk we'll do the whole year.
Ever, yeah.
And then we went to Central Park, which was still kind of like, that's partially grids on the west and east side, and then the center, which is a little more wild. And then week 3, we were downtown. And that's when we started kind of developing this idea, thinking about how the streets are laid out. And we kind of started stumbling on this idea that there's the downtown area, which grew organically, you know, from different farm plots, and it's, you know, twisting, and streets will start and end, and then we have the grid, which was applied with this very future-thinking idea that, you know, Manhattan was going to expand beyond its current means. And what ended up happening, it seems to us, or as we've been discussing it, was something that blew beyond anybody's imagination, in the respect that it has both the structure, the kind of the sluice way of capital flowing down to this cultural heart, this area of the city where you are allowed to still indulge and engage that navigation part of the human brain, the part where I can just wander around and I'm decision making, versus uptown.
This is Lower Manhattan.
Yes,
yeah.
The Lower Manhattan, where you're still very much engaged in, like, I'm looking for the path, almost like you're not in the woods. But when you're in the woods, and especially when you're not on trails, your mind starts seeing where the paths are.
Right.
And that's a very important part of the human brain, where you kind of make decisions. That is removed in Uptown, or not, Uptown was actually a separate piece. Up 110th up, it's kind of an amalgamation. It was, but we won't go there. But the grid itself, very much, it cuts out that navigation part in favor of, like, optimal pathways, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it's this interplay between the two that makes New York City this kind of powerful cultural center that it is, you know? And when we were listening to the interview, of course you've now expounded upon it much more, but when we were listening to the interview, there was something about that combination of culture and structure, embedded, embodied, that felt like it was in the city itself, you know?
Yeah. I think it works that way. Is that there's a guy, his name is Colin Woodard, and he has come up with a history of the United States that identifies 11 distinct cultures. He calls them nations. 11
I think I've heard of this before.
nations. Okay? And his research was in American history, and he identified these, through that area of study. Then he ran across a language map in which they laid out this is the way the languages had been distributed. And it lays over very remarkably with his map. And now you're looking at the voting patterns. And since we're so divided, red and blue and mixing, etc., lays over very accurately.
Wow.
And the COVID-19 responses with the mask and no wear the mask, fight the mask, etc., etc. It's all. So there's that structure.
Yeah.
But he's talking strictly in terms of it was the Scottish Irish that came in. It was the French. It was the Spanish. It was the New England was the Puritans, et cetera, and because Yankeedom, and it expanded in certain ways up through the north, in North Central. I mean, he's got two books on it, and it's he's got one book on that's the map.
Yeah.
And it's really remarkable, and it just keeps reproducing.
Yeah. Yeah,
that's fascinating.
Some sort of biomemory there as well,
So Wall Street keeps being Wall Street,
right?
And that's and so then you had the thing of the Occupy Wall Street.
Yeah.
So
what was Ganas's state during that? I mean, you were out of the period of time where, pre-2000s, where you guys were pushing very hard and you were more settling into maintenance and kind of having things happen more organically rather than forcing it. Was there any involvement in your recollection at that time, and kind of what has been maybe up till present day? Like what does involvement look like to that point?
With reference to
I guess
Occupy
Wall Street all the way up to Black Lives Matter, I guess, because I kind of see them linked in some way.
When Occupy Wall Street was going on, well, all kinds of people were fascinated. People from outside came and stayed here in order to go to Occupy Wall Street.
Yeah.
And we were having a discussion one morning in terms of in our planning session. And people were talking, oh my God, this Occupy Wall Street, they're really trying out democracy, et cetera, et cetera. And Julie said, people, we've been doing that for fucking 20 years right here in the room. Where the fuck is your mind?
Right.
Amazing. Yeah.
And Occupy Wall Street lasted a month.
It didn't. I mean, we had conversations about it recently with respect to the recent swelling of Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd's death, and we did a podcast. We talked about it, and I remember when Occupy happened. I was very excited about it, and the I guess how I interpret the idea of like the leaderless leadership or something that was happening at that time seemed very novel to me, and then ultimately felt, from my perspective, like it was unable to latch on in the greater consciousness because people look for some leadership, some tier of leadership to be able to understand what a movement is about. If there's not somebody that is taking the mantle of representing it, even if it's they're doing a job that's bad or somehow egotistical, it becomes very hard, or either very hard or easy for an outsider to dismiss. And I wonder, from your perspective of, I know it's not top down, but I know you told me what it was, but I forget what it, but there is a type of
participatory management.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I really like that phrase.
Yeah. There is some type of person that people can look to in order to trust making a final decision or something, and that seemed to be lacking from my perspective on the Occupy side of things. And I don't know, I guess relative to everything I just said, what is your observation of the Occupy situation? Did it seem to fall short in terms of having that thrust of direction?
Before I try to answer that question, would you like a little taste of our process?
Sure.
Okay. You're having a very, very hard time holding on to the notion of participatory management.
The phrasing.
Right.
Yeah.
But even in the way you've talked about Occupy and leaderless and that, it's like you're struggling to get clear on something. And we're having a hard time. Okay, so I'm giving you feedback.
Yeah.
I'm seeing something, so I'm stopping the conversation to step down to let's look at how this conversation is working.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm giving you the feedback. So now, in terms of the feedback, the ideal thing for you to do is to hear it as fully and as thoroughly as you can, so you can evaluate whether it's useful or it's not.
Okay.
Any attempt to defend, I'm not saying you're doing that, but any attempt to defend cut you off from getting the information that's coming towards you.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was the main thing that we focused on. And anyone can give anyone feedback. And the participatory management system is based on consulting. That is, you get the feedback. You even get the feedback on your performance as a manager, because if somebody working under you is saying, look, you're really fucked up and I want to talk about this.
Yeah.
The conversation is had.
Yeah.
Back to the conversation. There's a binary of leader or leaderless. Leader, if you have the binary, then the leader, there's something really wrong with it. It gets all fucked up. It becomes domination. On the other hand, the other part of the binary is leaderless. It's chaotic. And Occupy Wall Street fell apart, in part because they couldn't really have a conversation.
Yeah.
Because someone could get up and say, I want to speak, and then they had to let them speak.
Yeah.
They had no structure.
Yeah.
Participatory management, if you just step back and look at it, it has hierarchy, and it has anyone is possible to participate and speak to any issue the hierarchy is dealing with. So what the leaderless is trying to get to is contained in that. And what the leadership is trying to get to is contained in that. The binary framing wipes you out.
Right.
Yeah.
Everybody says, oh, we don't want it's equality or hierarchy. No. And then there's the other shift, which is primary, is that we never talked about someone has the right to speak. We talked about you have the responsibility to listen. Because if you're listening, you're going to have something useful to say or ask.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the main people who have to listen are the managers.
Right.
Because they're the ones who have to make the decision.
Right.
So you really got to listen. It's in the listening,
Yeah.
not in you have a right to do this.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's why this whole project was profoundly political.
Yeah.
So it makes all the sense in the world that you would have a struggle with this concept of participatory management.
Yeah.
That you, because you're male, would have more difficulty than she would have it because she's female.
Mm-hmm.
Habitus.
Mm.
I also
A
have
lot of things got embodied with her that you and I missed out on.
Yeah.
One of the we used to redo the stores, redecorate, rearrange, and everything like that. And Mildred would be down, and she was always doing sexual relationship counseling, and so she'd have a team of women around, and they'd be talking about this and this relationship and that relationship, and I always made sure that I was positioned somewhere nearby, because I listened all the time, because I didn't have it. It was like, this is, I just knew that whatever I was getting was just filling some vacuum that I didn't get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I grew up with 3 brothers
Yeah.
and an Irish mother, and
Yeah.
she ruled with a pretty heavy hand.
Well, I mean,
So whether that's relevant or not,
yeah.
to the extent that you hear that and take it in and think about it,
Yeah.
then you've got something new to work
Well,
with.
I do.
I think it'll sink in.
I do hear that. I think I do, and I appreciate you taking the time out of the conversation than rather to answer the question.
Broaden the definition of conversation. You can't have a conversation unless you can talk about how you're talking in the conversation.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I appreciate you incorporating into the conversation the tier necessary.
Right. The reason why is because you guys are available to really take it in.
Yeah.
Could have had this conversation with 200 people, but they couldn't take it in.
Yeah.
It didn't it wouldn't compute, so there wasn't any point going there.
When you have the discussions in group, either in the morning sessions or I guess otherwise, is this understanding implicit to most of the members, where you can slide to that next tier immediately, and it's not like it doesn't need to be, I guess, offensive, but also it doesn't even need to be mentioned that we're going there. Like everybody understands, like we need to hit this layer first before we go to that discussion.
Yeah.
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 In varying degrees, because there's people, 5 or 6 of us went through the whole Megillah,
Yeah.
and others have joined later and all of that, but they were attracted to it.
Yeah.
But there's a basic understanding, is that you've got to stop a conversation in order to find out what's really going on. That's jamming the conversation.
Yeah. So it must feel like, well, I'm not a musician, but I did play some music periodically. But it must really feel like riding a wave of like good music or something. You're all jamming on when it's like you don't even need to, like everybody's hitting where it needs to go, and all of a sudden, wow, we made a lot of decisions today for some reason. We were just all on the same page.
We get some conversations like that.
Yeah.
And we get some conversations where we're like, oh God.
Yeah.
Can we quit early, please?
Yeah. But I would imagine that must be one of the primary enthusiasms to being a part of this community, is that conversing. The idea of getting all together in a room, sharing ideas. I think you mentioned it in the other interview to some capacity that, you are greater as a consequence of being a part of this community.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
There's no question about it. If
Yeah.
it's conversation, I go away better than I was when I came up the stairs.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I wanted to talk about food. I imagine that, when you talk to a prospective new person, or even just a person that you're describing the situation to, you go, I think it was $920. I don't know if it is that much anymore, but it is X amount of dollars to live at Ganas, depending on the year, and that includes food. Like that is
Toilet paper, toothpaste.
Yeah. I mean, it includes a wonderful amount of things. I was also thinking in the shower before we had the conversation, like, well, it includes internet. Did it include telephone previously? Like where there must have been some like things that have been switched in and out over the course of 40 years as technology has developed. But food, that's the thing that when people think about culture and sharing culture, they often think about food as the first thing, and it's such, oh, I can live and eat here? Well, then what more do I need? I can do so much. How was that apart from the get? It was like food is shared, and like how has that evolved as a dynamic and a part of the community? Has it grown? Has it shrunk as the years have gone on?
Pretty early on, a dinner was a major, that there's a dinner for everyone was a mainstay, and that stayed. The planning session was like a breakfast for whoever came to it. There was the whole thing laid out for breakfast, and COVID-19 ended that because you come with your mask on.
Right.
And it was all the people would be in the room, and now we've got a few people in the room who can space themselves, and other people come in through Zoom. So it's a Zoom room session, and that's changed, the whole dynamic. For a very long time, and probably all the way up until we started going into the changeover, the food taste, et cetera, there was very little in the way of private food. Okay. I'm not sure how much of this had to do with the changeover, but it also had to do with the fact that people started getting into this whole stuff about healthy food, organic food, et cetera, and then the whole culture has been taken over by people coming in with very. So we went from having a single refrigerator in a house to having two. One's the community refrigerator, one's the private food refrigerator. And it was like when we started doing this, and saying, what the fuck is going on here? This is privatization.
Right.
This is what, huh?
Yeah.
But in a way, it really wasn't privatization. It was, adjusting to. There's been a real change in the whole culture and the way people relate to food, and so we adapted to it.
Yeah.
So, am I?
Yeah. I mean, this is definitely on the right track. Yeah. Yeah.
For a long time, we were. I guess you would say we were like a meat and potato community.
Yeah.
And so there were some people from another community were visiting, and they were talking about, you guys, there's no, you have vegetables, yeah, and that's pretty good, but there's no, I can't make a salad. There's nothing here for a salad.
Right.
And, and there's people, well, who wants to make a salad? No, it's, and then someone finally said, all right, how would we do that?
Yeah.
We have the table. We've got it's big enough to take all this other food for 100 people. How are we going to set up a salad bar? And the woman got up and said, "Look, you have this over here, and you just got drinks and stuff like that. You can put another thing over here, and then you use that." And we just went in and did it. And she was right.
Yeah.
She said, "Here, you can do it this way." Oh yeah, we can, and we did it.
Yeah.
So that's where the salad bar became instituted, and that was a result of outside input.
Yeah. That's great. Do you, 40 years worth of time, do you recall ever, is there like a spot during those time where you were like, oh, that was a good run of cooks, or something? Was there ever like a period where it was like, oh man, that person knew what they were doing. I really like that time.
Yeah. And then there were runs when it was like,
Yeah.
we actually have about 4 people who cook.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a Russian woman who did all the cooking. That was her whole job, and she was really amazing. She had a baby, taking care of the baby and doing the cooking and all of this.
Wow.
But mostly what we have, the way we do it now is that we have a cook and we have a prep person. And then someone comes in to help do the salad bar. And the salad bars may be, setting up the salad bar is like a couple hours of work. And the prepping is about 3 or 4 hours of work. And the cook is pretty much the whole day.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. How, you mentioned that this restaurant...
One thing about the food, though, I think
Yeah.
you should really, really know, because this is something to really go, you gotta be kidding me.
Oh yeah, that is.
How much money do you think we spend per person per month?
Oh.
Per person, per month.
Right.
Ooh, that's a good question.
I'm going to embarrass myself guessing. I feel like I'm either going to blow it too high or too low.
I know, me too.
Because you're buying in bulk. $28? I don't know.
I was gonna say 100. So we have a range.
90.
90. She knows better than me. Yeah. I mean, that's still incredible.
But I
that's
also
incredible.
thought 100 is very low, because what we pay for the 2 of us is like probably 100 every week and a half.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we probably spend $250 per person on food typically.
Yeah. What is the workflow or the purchasing, like what does that look like in broad terms?
On Wednesday morning, they drive up this big van, and 3 people get in it, and they go out and do a whole tour of stores and things, and come back with about $1,200, $1,500 worth of food. And then at 7 o'clock, the text goes out, a whole bunch of people show up and chain the food up to the pantry, which is, this is 139, 135. The pantry is the basement of the 131.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, we got the text this week, but we're in quarantine, so we can't touch the food.
We're excited to help next week. I
Yeah.
think next week will be the
Our
first day
first time,
we can
yeah.
do it. But yeah.
How
And it used to be, I mean, before COVID,
yeah.
There was a whole table was set up and chairs on the outside, and so you could have 15 or 20 people eating dinner together.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
That's
Yeah,
really nice.
you mentioned the Russian woman that was that had the baby with her. I presume that they lived here in the community.
Mhm.
When
Everyone who works here lives here.
Yeah.
There's been an exception or two, but for the most part.
How far in was it that you had the first child living here, and what, in general, speak a little bit about what like the range of experiences with having children growing up in the community.
Well, between 1980 and 2000, there were very few children. After 2000, it was one of the big changes. So Susan adopted Nina. She's from Kazakhstan, and then there were 2 people who lived upstairs, Anna and Patricio, and they adopted a child from Colombia. And then there was a couple that lived here that had there was a person who was a longtime person, a member. He wasn't in the core group, but he was very integrated and played a very vital role in many ways. And he hooked up with a woman who had a child. And so at one time, and then David and Nikki had a child, and then Catherine moved in and she had a child. So there was a time when there were like 5 or 6
Wow.
children, 7, or and almost all of those now are teenagers. So that was the whole range of our child rearing.
Wow.
And the parents never were able to work out an agreement on how they wanted to do child care. Each had their different things, et cetera, et cetera. So it never became a collective thing.
Yeah. So you said most of them are teenagers, so they still So they still live here.
Bram is here, Dean is here. One of the things that happened after the changeover, and it was 2006, 2007, something like that, Anna and Patricio, who were upstairs, and Anna was George's brother, so she was one of the original people, although she was never in the core group. They decided to buy a house down the street. And so then Nikki moved out, and Nikki and David were a couple, and Nikki moved out, and they had a son, and so they're living right next door to 48.
Oh, wow.
And then David moved out and partnered with someone, and he lives down the street. And then Eric was a long-term member of the core group, and he married and I want to say Emily, but that's not her name. Ruby. Ruby is now about 14, and they just moved out about a year and a half ago, but they live, over there.
Oh, wow. So everyone stayed close by.
So there's like an extended community around the community.
That's nice.
It's interesting, the changeover, if I'm understanding it correctly, that the idea of it going from there being kind of an intentional energy to there being a kind of for lack of a better word, non-intentional energy. That's not good, but you know what I mean. It's interesting though that maybe it's also the group got to a certain point where it didn't have to be conscious, like it's an unconscious still developing though. Everybody's still maintaining close ties, and it's like when you master something, like I don't know if you've heard of that 10,000 hour rule or something, where if you do something for 10,000 hours, you become a master at it. And just the idea that it had been happening for so long that it no longer had to be at the forefront to still be happening, and to have it just still like this community is existing now beyond the structures of what this community is, but it's still espousing the values, and there's still an allegiance and a dedication to the spirit of it, and it's just shining out of it rather than speaking out of it.
But it's not really reproducing. All of the people that are around were people who were, to one degree or another, really, in the project. Although Nikki wasn't really in the project that much. But David was part of the core group. Anna and Patricia were very much part of the project, although they weren't part of the core group. Eric was in the core group, and Jenny, his wife, was very much into in fact, they'll come into planning and sit down and, you would say, where have y'all been? I haven't seen you around, but you're obviously, integrated.
Yeah.
But there's no new blood.
Yeah.
It's very, very few.
I mean, I guess from my perspective, it's reproducing in my imagination. The fact that we are hearing it now, it has sparked our interest and our, and then who knows if we do anything with that energy, but we promulgate it out further, and then it, Ganas as an individual doesn't have ambitions anymore, but the ambitions of Ganas extend
Right.
in ways that are fluid, you know?
And my book is trying to do the same thing.
Yeah.
It's called Growing Democracy,
Mm.
taking our democracy and love to a new level.
Yeah.
And it's a core part of the whole thing is the transformative community of practice.
Yeah. That's great. I think that's a really great time to turn these off. We can keep talking, but
Sure.
it feels like a nice capsule.
No, I'm up for getting. I want to hear about
Yeah.
your stories and your trip and all of that kind
Yeah.
of stuff.
Well, fortunately, we
absolutely.
have 3 weeks to continue this
Right.
conversation. I would love to be able to talk more, and I hundreds more questions that I could ask about this. But yeah,
Sure.
we definitely want to tell you about what we're doing too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I want to bring the book in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is wonderful.
Yeah. Thanks for taking the time.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, that's it. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. I hope you enjoyed. As always, if you could do the like thing, the share thing, we do this every week. We'll be back next week talking about South Staten Island, our walk through there, which, as we have been told, is a very different profile from the northern parts we've been exploring these past few weeks.
Yeah, we haven't been there yet. We'll keep you posted. We will be there next week. We'll fill you in.
Yeah. But thanks so much for listening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.